remember running around Regency Square Mall, and it was like I was playing Frogger. I almost got taken out by a fire truck. I mean, you do have to be super careful, but I don't take risks. If I see a car coming and I'm towards the end of my run, I feel tired, I'm definitely going to let that car pass. I'm going to live to fight another day.
Hello and welcome into episode 4 of Running for Coverage. I'm Cole Pepper, and I am so pleased that you decided to join us here. Let's start with what we're looking at coming up here on this episode. We're going to be hearing from Marshall Butler. You just heard his voice a moment ago. He is running every street in Jacksonville. That is a tall task, and we'll find out why he's doing it and what he's learned from it a little bit later on. We'll also get a coaching tip from Keith Brantly. This is big for the mental side of the game. We're going to hear what Keith says about setting goals in your running. A guy who certainly knows about setting and achieving goals as a 1996 U.S. Olympic marathoner and a great coach in the area as well. Well, let's start with looking back at the past weekend, the long weekend, as it were, for Memorial Day. There were 2 races. One, a Grand Prix race in Jacksonville, and that, of course, was the 40th annual Florida Striders Memorial Day 5K. And what a finish in this one. On the men's side, the winner came down to the final second. Jordan Garman outracing Matthew Tadeo by 1 second, maybe a little less than a second, to win. 15:34 for Garman, and Tadeo running 15:35. Very impressive there for 1-2. And Kelsey Pontius, who we've had on the podcast, won the women's side 17 flat, one of her faster 5Ks. Of course, she's in the process of training for the U.S. Olympic marathon trials. Her husband, Cody, by the way, 19 seconds behind her. So some good motivation there. Crystal Davis finished second in the women's division, 18:08, and Julia Budendorf at 18:53. Also want to give a shout out to 93-year-old Augie Leone, who finished the race in 44 minutes, 33 seconds. At 93, you might know Augie as the oldest Gate River Run participant ever, starter and finisher. And just a wonderful guy. I had a chance to meet and talk with before the Gate River Run a couple of years ago. We'll have Augie on the podcast at some point too. He is a great story. Never really ran until he got close to his 70th birthday. And now look at him, just amazing. Also, there was a bit of controversy. Controversy is probably the wrong word. But, everybody gets a finisher medal. And unfortunately, there was some copywriting issues, and it said finisher on the medal. Hey, I'm a baseball card collector, so it's an error card all of a sudden. It's worth more that you won your finisher medal running the next to last Grand Prix of the year. We'll get into what's coming up on the Grand Prix series here in just a bit. There was also the Kindness Matters 5K in Jax Beach for 160 runners finished. 17-year-old Dominic Gerasi, who runs in Mandarin, won the men's side 18:49. He was a state finalist in the 800-meter and 4x800-meter relay. And Heather Thompson won for the women 23:47. So here's what we have coming up this week. We have Saturday, we've got the Pink Ribbon Symposium Butterfly 5K. That's in Orange Park. And then on Wednesday, it is Global Running Day. And it happens to be the same day as the JTC running track meet at Bowles, as well as the Global Running Day 5K at First Place Sports in Bay Meadows. So a chance for you to run on Global Running Day. And then the following weekend, the final Grand Prix race of the spring season, the Run for the Pies, and they will crown the Jacksonville Grand Prix champions after that race. All right, that's what we have coming up and what we had this past weekend. But let's take a moment here as we get set to welcome in Marshall Butler, who is running every street in Jacksonville. An amazing goal for him. And we'll hear more on why and how and what he's learned from it coming up right after this. When I heard what my guest today on the podcast was doing, first of all, I didn't really believe it. Then I had so many questions. I wanted to know not only how are you doing it, but more importantly, why are you doing it? So that's the first question for Marshall Butler, who is trying to run every street in Jacksonville. Marshall, why?
Yeah, it's probably the first question everybody asks me is why, and as a guy that was born and raised in Jacksonville, I love the city, and it's been a great experience to really understand our city at a very micro level. Um, I just I've been able to explore those neighborhoods beyond the roads that we travel every day. I've told folks that I bet on average people travel maybe drive 5% of Jacksonville streets, Butler, Beach, Roosevelt, but they never see those 2, 3, 4 streets behind those, and they never understand those communities and what happens in those communities. And for me, first, it was a great way to jumpstart some training for a marathon a couple of years ago, but then it just became a real crusade to understand my city on a micro level.
This is a bigger deal than just training. I mean, you've taken this to a whole new level, and we're going to put a link to the map that you shared with us of your progress in our newsletter. So if you've not subscribed to the newsletter and want to see the map, you do that. You can follow Marshall on Instagram. You can get that as well. But um, I was looking, and there are several. I mean, no doubt there are a lot of streets that get run a lot that have major streets off of them, and but gosh, there's some places where there's these little shoots out to the side, little cul-de-sacs or loop arounds. Must drive you nuts when you get back home and you look at the map, you go, oh, I could have run that one, and then I got to go back and find another time to run that.
That's right. Yeah, sometimes you do get frustrated that you got to go back and rerun a street, or I do occasionally go and drive around and just run one block, here and there across the city. It's very interesting, though. Some of those little spots where it looks like I missed, City Strides, the tool that I use, is based on the OpenStreetMap project. And actually, it allows me to go in there and update that sometimes, because you're not going to believe this, but some roads, like dead ends, people have actually annexed the end of the road as their own property. There's a place off Crystal Springs Road, I remember, where I was running down the street and it was a cul-de-sac. Someone just put a chain link fence across the road and said, "This is now mine." There's other areas where it looks like businesses have annexed the ends of streets. And I asked my buddy Jim Overton, who used to be the property appraiser. I said, "Jim, what's up with this?" He said, "Well, let us know where that happens, and we'll go check it out." There is a process to go through annexing a road, but you can't just kind of claim it for yourself.
But you've just outed yourself as a government informant now with this. So,
That's right.
we'll be keeping an eye out. So I'm assuming that this does not include highways, but what are the busiest streets that you have run on?
There have been sections of Phillips Highway and South Side that I've had to run down. And again, typically I'm running around 5 a.m., between 5 and 6 a.m. So it's kind of slow those times. I do try to hit some of those that I have to get on that are very busy, maybe on Sunday mornings, because there's less traffic. Hopefully, all the people that have been out partying or have found their way home again. So yeah, usually those are early on a Sunday morning. There was a period of time where Butler Boulevard was part of the route that I had to take. It was part of the City Strides map. And I was coming up, trying to think of strategies. How was I going to run down Butler Boulevard? And I did come up with the idea that maybe I would grab an empty gas can and run down the road, acting like I'd run out of gas in case a cop saw me and asked me, "What the heck are you doing?" But fortunately, that's no longer interstates, major roads like that. I'm not going to do those.
So just take me through the logistics of this. When you decide you're going to run these 20 streets today, what does it look like?
Yeah, sure. So the whole project started as I mentioned, as a kickstart to get ready for the Jacksonville Marathon. I was having a hard time getting my mojo going. I'd run the race 5, 6, 7 years in a row, and so I started running out of my front door. I said, "All right, to get started, I'm going to run all the streets in Riverside and Avondale, and I'm going to lead from my front door and do that." And so I did it, and it was a great way to kind of it's almost like gamification, to kind of encourage yourself to train. And so I did that. And a couple of years later, I said, "All right, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do Riverside, Avondale, and then I'm going to add Ortega." And so I did all that. And then I found out about this tool, City Strides, corresponding with a guy that had run across the country and now was going to run every street in San Francisco. And he led me onto this. And so I thought, that's really cool. I'm going to do every street in Jacksonville, forgetting it's the largest geographic landmass in the United States, dumb me. But at that point, I realized, well, if I'm going to do this, I can't do all the runs leaving from my house. I'm gonna have to start driving. And so I did create a rule that when I do drive to go run somewhere, the elapsed time driving has to be less than the time running. So I'm not going to drive 15 minutes to go run a mile. If I'm driving 15 minutes, 30 minutes round trip, I'm usually going to run 45 minutes to an hour. Typically, I'm running anywhere from 1 to 2 hours when I go out. But, I'll identify an area. I will look at Google Maps. I will look at Street View to kind of, I like to look down the dead ends. I prefer to call them cul-de-sacs, not dead ends. Dead end is a little bit too morbid, but I look down those. There's some really dark ones too that don't have streetlights. I do look at crime maps to see what's going on in some of these areas to make sure they haven't had an outbreak of violent crime. Typically, it's not between 5 and 7 when I'm out there, but and then I'll create the map, and I use my Garmin 935. I use Strava to map the run, and then it downloads into my Garmin, and it essentially gives me turn-by-turn directions. And there's a graph theory, a mathematical theory called the Chinese postman, and it is what is the shortest distance to touch every edge of a given route. And so when you do this, as you mentioned, you're running some of the same streets over and over again. It's impossible to be completely efficient. Dead ends are a great example, but sometimes you have to do some loops and stuff like that to hit all the streets. Typically, I'm about 60 to 65% efficient. So with 4,000 to 5,000 miles of streets in Jacksonville, that means all told, this project is going to be about 6,000 or 7,000 miles by the end of it. There's 14,785 streets. I'm just under 10,000 streets right now, so right at about 65%.
Wow. What are going to be the hardest streets to run on that you have remaining?
So, everyone always asks, aren't you afraid to run in some of these neighborhoods and stuff like that? I've covered a lot of Jacksonville so far. I've covered much of Southwest Jacksonville, Argyle, Oakleaf, 103rd Street, Mandarin, Southside, Arlington, Sandalwood. Now I'm in East Side, Talleyrand, Springfield, stuff like that. People, talk about, Jacksonville there's a lot of crime. There's violent crime in Jacksonville. And I remember telling a friend of mine who's a police officer what I was doing. And he said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I do." It's been a great project. And I said, I think that there are times in Jacksonville, it's never completely quiet, but there are more quiet times, maybe between 5 and 7 a.m. where, it's my assertion that bad guys have to sleep too. And so he said, yeah, there is some truth to that. Those early morning hours, not the early morning, midnight to 3 or 4 a.m., but after that, there is kind of a lull. Still things happen, but it's quieter. And so there are some neighborhoods that, I know are notorious in Jacksonville for having crime, but, I'm smart about it. I don't run with headphones or no distractions, heads on a swivel. I'm paying attention to my surroundings. I hear everything. I can smell things for blocks because the air is so still at that time of the morning. I also know, I learned this back in college sociology, that less violent crime happens in the winter than in the summer because less people want to be out when it's 20, 25 degrees. So I have run some of these areas that are defined as have a higher propensity maybe for violent crime in the months of January, February, December, when it's 20, 25 degrees or when it's pouring down rain. Because I know I do see people out sometimes, but, I don't think they want to mess around with a crazy guy running down the middle of the street. It is interesting. I have run down some streets before in some of these areas, and I run down the street, and then the next morning I go back to do another run in the area, and I see crime tape surrounding an area that I just ran. So I know, stuff is happening, but I typically try not to run the same areas or run from the same spot consecutive days or create a pattern. I try to mix it up because I don't want people to really pay attention to what I'm doing. I really want to blend into the background. I like to slip out into the darkness. Unlike what you're supposed to do, excuse me, as a runner, I do wear a lot of dark clothing just because I don't want to show up. I don't want people to see me. I want to blend into the background. And, you do have to be careful. You have to pay attention to cars and stuff like that. And I know Jacksonville has a pretty high fatality rate for pedestrians, but when I'm running, there's not as much traffic on the roads, and I'm very heightened awareness of the traffic and paying attention to to what's going on. So
That's one of the things I was going to ask you about was how, in this process of what 5 years almost of doing this,
Yeah.
how has your perception of how runners are treated on the roads of Jacksonville changed?
Yeah. In the mornings, it is pretty slow. There are areas, industrial areas, where people have to go to work early, and you have to be super careful. Right now, I'm running Talleyrand. I can tell you when all the Jacksport people show up to work to go operate all the machinery. I can tell you when all the nurses show up at the Mayo Clinic in the morning, because I almost got run over off of San Pablo. Everyone's coming to work at the same time. Um, I remember running around Regency Square Mall, and it was like I was playing Frogger. I almost got taken out by a fire truck. I mean, you do have to be super careful, but I don't take risks. If I see a car coming and I'm towards the end of my run, I feel tired, I'm definitely going to let that car pass. I'm going to live to fight another day. So I'm super careful. It's funny. I've been running in the industrial areas of the far west side, and it's interesting in those areas. There is the wafting of weed. And I think, man, these people had to get a drug test to drive that forklift, but apparently after you get the job, anything goes. That is pretty interesting going through some of these areas. You see people sitting in cars early morning, and you smell the stank. There's people using some recreational drugs early in the morning. I'm not an informant on that either, so don't
I was going to
come at
say
me.
we've already set that up.
Yeah.
So beyond those revelations, what is it that you've learned about Jacksonville, your hometown, and
Yep.
born and raised here? So, what have you learned that you think maybe you would not have known about Jacksonville had you not decided to run every street?
It's so diverse. I mean, it's amazing. People don't recognize how many. It truly is a melting pot. It's so amazing to see these little enclaves of these ethnic groups. Running around Wolfson and running around these other areas. You see these groups of ethnicities, and that's interesting. You see the difference. Really, they talk about the other side of the tracks. Sometimes they're sharing a fence. There's a neighborhood that I ran in the Bay Meadows area, and I went in there, and it was truly like a third world country. I mean, the roads were rutted out. There were disabled cars. The houses were in disarray. But if you look just behind those houses, you could see this fence, and you could see these brand new 2-story, really nice homes that had been built. And so you really see the disparity in economic opportunity. I had a friend that was a fireman, and he said, yeah, it was always hard when we went back into those neighborhoods, because the truck would bottom out on those roads. There's a neighborhood near the Walmart on Phillips. It's called Larson. And until I think it's the last 6 or 7 years, that neighborhood didn't have clean running water in their homes. There was a Superfund site right down the road, and it had poisoned all the wells. And so these folks we're in the middle of Jacksonville, Florida, a city of over 1 million people, and these people don't have clean water. I ran past a church in that area, and they had a sign out front, an old sign that said, bring us your gallon jugs and we'll fill them with water. And just understanding that there are people that can't turn a tap in their house and have water. It was really something. You really do have, it develops an empathy that, there's so many people that are blessed, and there's so many people that they're just fighting to live. And it really has given me a greater appreciation, for some of the things that I have.
Has this project changed you as a person?
I think it has. I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about, I think of Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery was running. We don't know the whole story. We don't know everything that happened, but this is a man that's running down the middle of the street, and he is ambushed, and he's killed. And I think about myself running some of these neighborhoods, and I definitely don't belong in these neighborhoods. Am I entitled to be in these neighborhoods? Should I be in these neighborhoods running these streets? I remember I was running towards a housing project in Jacksonville, and this lady is at a light. I'm standing at the light waiting for the light to change so I can run across the street. She knows I don't belong here. She knows that I am fish out of water. This is not my area. She rolls down her window and she says, hey, you, be careful. And that I'm sure she was a mother. I could just sense, she really wanted me to be safe. And so I do sometimes run through these neighborhoods and think, should I be here? Is this something I should be doing? I mean, running through these neighborhoods that they're super dangerous. I mean, there's shot spotters on top of the utility poles that are used to triangulate gunshots so that the police are notified when people don't let them know that some sort of gun crime has occurred. And thinking that I'm in these areas, it makes me wonder, do I belong here? Do I have the right to be in these neighborhoods? I do make sure that when I run these neighborhoods and run any neighborhood, that I acknowledge the people on the side of the road. I always want to show respect and let them know that I see them, that, I say hello or good morning. Sometimes they don't respond back. That's okay. Sometimes, if it's kind of a sketchy situation, I might say it, from the other side of the street. Just, keeping myself safe. I never allow myself to get too close to anybody on these runs, just trying to maintain that kind of bubble of safety for myself.
Right. So do you know when you're going to finish this? You said you've got about 5,000 streets to go. And do you have a target date about all this?
Yeah, the goal is to wrap it up in about 2 years. Based on some modeling that I've done, it's possible to get these last roads done in 2 years. It may take a little bit longer, but that's the stretch goal right now. That's what I'm gearing forward towards. So May 5th, 2025, it's my 55th birthday. And so I would like to get it done by then. But, there's early on in this project, roads came very quickly. You could go into a new subdivision, and there's lots of cul-de-sacs. You hit 30, 40 streets in a single 8-mile run. Nowadays, the streets are longer. Didn't realize these numbered streets in Springfield, the west streets, West 13th, West 12th. These are long roads. They go way into the west side. And so streets don't come as fast anymore. There's big roads like Heckscher and Normandy and Yellow Water and these long roads that I still need to do that, there's a lot of planning that's going to go into those too, maybe parking my car at one end and having my wife, shuttle me to the other to run back to my car. There's still a lot of planning that has to go into it, but yeah, if I could get this whole project done in the next few years, I'd be super happy.
Well, it'll be something. That'd be a great way to touch off a Cinco de Mayo celebration. There's no doubt about that.
That's right.
So it'll be something to watch. Marshall, thanks so much. We'll be following your progress. I probably could ask you 30 or 40 minutes more of questions on this, but for the sake of brevity, we'll end volume 1 here, and down the line, as you continue this progress, we'll bring you back in and have more questions and learn more from you about it.
Sounds great. Love to do it. Thanks for the time.
Well, as you can imagine, Marshall has some gear that he really relies on. So I asked him to tell us what is the one piece of gear he doesn't run without. And having just heard what he does, you could probably guess what it is.
Yeah, so the one piece of gear that I will not run without is my handy dandy Garmin watch. Without my Garmin watch, there's no evidence that I ran the streets that I said I did. So it's so important well, not just for evidence that I actually ran the street, but it also provides me the path and the way when I am running the streets. So always carry the Garmin with me. Typically, I have 10, 15 streets or routes loaded into the Garmin at any given time. Usually I have them surround all over the city. So I have a couple, west side, couple of south side that I still need to do, north side. A lot of times people say, hey, I'd like to run with you. So I want to have a couple of runs ready to go in a certain area of town if I can meet up with folks. But the Garmin watch, it's been, I run with the Garmin 935. It's a triathlon watch. It's been a little bit frustrating for me because it only has the 50 waypoints. And a lot of times when you're running a lot of cul-de-sacs and dead ends, it eats those up really quickly. And so sometimes I have to cobble 2 routes together. So run half of a route, find another route, and then start the next route. But yeah, I've been running with, I was one of the newbies that ran with the old Forerunner 201 when it first came out. I think in 2003, it took up, half your arm. It was huge. And it took forever to get a GPS signal. And I've iterated through all the Garmin models since then, the 910 XT and I really do enjoy the Garmin devices, and I think maybe that is kind of the origin story of this. Just all the way back in 2003, the thought of being able to map something and see where you've been and overlay it onto a Google map, and then going back and looking at it later. I think that has always been an appeal to me, not just how far did I go or how fast did I go, but where did I go? And so I've been a big proponent of Garmin watches over the last 20 years.
Marshall certainly has established a remarkable goal. And as he mentioned, he's more than 2/3 of the way there to accomplishing this goal. And just a couple of years away, perhaps, from crossing that final finish line on that new street. Unless there are more streets that are going to be built, which there probably will be, knowing how Jacksonville is growing. Maybe it'll stretch it out just a little bit for him. But that is a big goal. And in our weekly coaching tip, we welcome back Keith Brantly, 1996 U.S. Olympic marathoner, to talk about goal setting, what he talks about with his athletes he's coaching, and what he thought about as an athlete. How do you really decide how to set a goal and what to do once you've set it?
You have to look at it from the perspective, from a professional level. Goal setting can be over years. My goals were 16 years out from post-college. So those types of thought processes depend on the person and where they are in their running career. If I'm looking at someone who is a good recreational runner, they're a good local runner, they've got to set goals that maybe would qualify them for maybe a team or even maybe even a local, even an Olympic trials. So you have to think of quadrenniums, 4-year periods and things like that. I often think that it's best to take a goal. Let's say it's a year out. Let's say it's a marathon, and it is a marathon that you're looking to run a personal best in, and you've qualified for it. You're ready to go. You need to look at it and start working backwards from where you need to be. So we know that our last long run for a marathon is typically 3 weeks out. And if I need that last long run to be 22 miles, I start working backwards from that. And where do I need to be? And what's nice about it is that you can build in the breaks that you need to, one, help yourself adapt from the hard training that you've just been doing, and two, allow your body and your mind to be able to recover and adapt and improve. Because we really only improve in running through adding stress and then allowing your body to recover from that stress.
You're talking about marathon training, or what I would call top local runners. Mm-hmm. Let's take it to the mid-packers. Let's take it to somebody who is just trying to improve on their 5K time, and maybe they might mix in a 10K or a 9K for a K9 kind of thing. But they're just running. Every month or month and a half, they're going to pick up a 5K, but they want to improve on that time. How about goal setting and the mental approach of goal setting when the steps along the way aren't necessarily always hit on time?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the goal here is that, let's say if I want to run, 20 minutes for the 5K at Run for the Pies, and right now I'm in about 21-minute shape, I need to break it down on a calendar, look at the calendar and say, okay, what workouts can I try to hit where I'm hitting these milestones that get me to that 5K time that I want to run? So if I need to be able to run, 640 pace, I need to make sure that I'm doing some workouts that actually build in incrementally into that. So I'm doing interval workouts. So maybe once a week, I'm going out and I'm going out either on the track or the roads, and I'm running 300 to 400 meters at that goal race pace. And then I start to stretch those times out. You only have a little bit of time left. So it's really work for 6 weeks, right? But if this will also help you reassess that goal as well, because it's just as important. Just because I say I want to run 21 minutes doesn't mean I can. But as you get closer and closer, you'll have a better idea of what your time will be based on some of the incremental workouts that you've been doing. I mean, if I've got to run 6:40 pace and I go and I run an interval workout where I run 3 times a mile and I'm only hitting 6:50s and I'm taking a break in between each mile, well, you know what? We may have to reassess that goal. But if I'm consistently hitting 6:30s, maybe I need to, say, move my goal up a little bit. Say, hey, maybe I can go under 20 minutes and 30 seconds. So I think part of this is hitting those incremental milestones in your training that help you build to that goal.
So it sounds like what you're saying is goals shouldn't be carved in stone, but you might want to write with pen and grab another tablet later if you have to.
Yep. Yeah, I would definitely use a pencil with a good eraser. And it's not an indictment of, it's not really a matter of whether or not you're failing to get those goals. You have to balance the incremental stress without getting injured. And that is a real challenge. That's why coaches are really good, because athletes are really good at being motivated. They're not so great at seeing the forest for the trees. And what I mean by that is that they feel that they can do anything. Okay. What they don't see is the injuries that can occur by running fast. And I always say, speed kills, and it can. If you're doing fast workouts, you're stressing your body, you're stressing your muscles and tendons, and you have to make sure that stress is not so much that it injures you, but also allows for incremental improvement. So it is a real balance. That's why coaches are so important. They keep athletes from hurting themselves. They keep athletes from themselves.
All right, good stuff there from Keith Brantly. We'll have more from Keith in our coaching sessions throughout the course of the podcast. We'll also hear from Kelsey Pontius on nutrition and some other local coaches as well as we continue. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends who are runners, who are interested in the running community. Want to continue to grow this, and the more people we have listening and watching on YouTube or Spotify, at some point it's going to pop in there on Apple Podcasts. We'll be able to grow this community and keep everybody connected and motivated as the summer progresses. So thanks so much for listening to Running for Coverage. A special thanks to Darren Ronan of the Ronan School of Music for composing and performing our original music throughout the course of the entire podcast. If you have a child or you yourself want to learn a musical instrument, I highly suggest checking out the Ronan School of Music. That's it for this edition of Running for Coverage. We'll talk to you next week, everybody.